Good morning or good afternoon, seeing it is just turning 12 o'clock and many of you are just in the process of joining. I'm expecting a few more people, but we'll get started with sort of introduction housekeeping pieces. This is Hiltrud Dawson, the Best Start Lead Health Promotion Consultant at Best Start by Health Nexus, and I'd like to welcome you all. I'm hoping you are we're able to get into work this morning with snow again, and I'm hoping snow is going to be on the way out soon because we've had a few ice and snowstorms, and hope you're all safe out there. We have another very exciting webinar, and we planned this a few weeks ago before we did the Best Start conference. Megan Phillips was going to present at the Best Start conference, but due to that freezing rain, she could not get there at all, so nobody has heard this at all. And this session has been tailored specifically for Healthy Babies, Healthy Children program. And we are going to be offering another webinar in March that's just for the general service providers. Okay, so you are the first to get to know this piece. So I'm just going to tell you a few little pieces that you need to know. So what really helps us, because a lot of you are sitting in a group listening together, and I see Brittany did that very nicely. If you can look at the attendee box that you should be able to see as well. You see Brittany from Brittany Peel, Peterborough Public Health, and she's put in brackets there too. If you can do that, if you're in a group, for example, Eastern Ontario Health Unit or those, up at the top of the attendee box, you see a little drop-down menu. If you click on that, it should be, you should see, the first word is hide, don't do that. But then the next piece, it says edit my info. So you can edit your own info and put in brackets at the back how many are there together sitting listening into the webinar. That's really helpful for us to know. For audio, I'm hoping that all of you can hear. There is the option of phone as well as using the computer speaker, so anyone who does not have audio on their computer can use the telephone. And please let us know through the chat line if there's any audio problems. Let me move on here. So just we had 4 webinars planned, and this is the last of the 4 webinars. You see also the chat box that is, quite, there's a few people putting some things in. So there's Roxanne putting in, and if you can't figure out the edit my info, do it this way. Send us how many people are with you on the line. That would be great. And then we'll be using the chat box for questions. So if you have a question, please type it in, whether it's in the middle of the presentation or towards the end, but we will go through them at the end. That's less interruptive to the presentation, so that works better. But it's often good so that you don't forget about your question, to type it right in, and then we don't have to wait for everyone typing at the end. So please use the chat line as needed. Then we have, if you are finding you're having trouble with fonts, it's not big enough for you, you can make this bigger. See that little square with the 4 arrows? If you click on that, it's at the top in the middle of your screen probably, or maybe slightly towards the right of your screen. If you click on that, you can make it full screen on your own computer, and that will give you more, a better view of the font, the slides, and it does not affect anyone else. So you can do that. Did I mention that the webinar is recorded? So for anyone that wasn't able to get on today, and I see lots of people are still logging in, We do have the webinar recorded, and you will be able to watch it afterwards. So I will be sending that link out, as well as a link for an evaluation. I may not be able to do that this afternoon because I have another something coming up right after, but I will be sending that out tomorrow morning. Then the other thing is that we also have the presentation for the webinar. You can see that in the right-hand corner of your screen, it says handouts. The first one is a webinar tip sheet. It just gives you some tips on, how to make the best of a webinar. And then there is another one. It's one of the older presentations, but the third line in there is the effective communication presentation that you can upload as a PDF handout to go along with what we are going to be talking about, or you can upload it for saving it for later so that you can take another look at the slides. And lastly, just a reminder, BestI provides information, offers training in the form of webinars, workshops, and online courses. We have 5 courses for healthy babies, healthy children. If you don't know anything about them, send me an email and I'll tell you what they are. We have an annual conference, which we just finished. That was in February. We had over 400 people attending on the main day. And 300 and something on the second day. We manage 5 online networks. One of them is the Healthy Babies, Healthy Children network. I do hope you use it and connect with others, get information that way, and also connect with us. And of course, you receive our own information. I'm not going to go to any more because we really want to get to our presenter. If you don't have my email, there it is. And lastly, I just want to introduce, or lastly, or firstly, or most importantly, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Megan Phillips. Megan is a registered psychotherapist and owner of Phillips Psychotherapy in London, Ontario. With nearly 20 years of mental health and addictions experience, Megan is well versed in the strategies and techniques required to support vulnerable populations through all stages of development, personal growth, and change. With specializations in anxiety, depression, PTSD, and complex trauma, as well as process disorders, including addictions and eating disorders, Megan is a versatile therapist and award-winning instructor of adult learning and post-secondary education. Please join me all in welcoming Megan. I'm really excited to hear her speak, and I'm sure you all are as well. I'm just going to switch to her Megan's slides.
All right. I think I've got the, oh, there we go. Fabulous. Oh, I'm looking at the list of participants, and this is so exciting. There's so many people here today. So I want to welcome everyone to Effective Communication Strategies for Clients Living with Mental Health and Addictions. So we'll just get started. So the first thing we need to talk about is effective and competent communication. And it's sensitive to the timing, the place in which the communication is going to occur, the situation under which the communication is going to occur, the culture between the communicator and the individual receiving the communication, as well as the symptoms that the individual may be experiencing. So we'll get into all of this as we proceed through the next several slides, but I just wanted to give you a foundation at this point. Okay, to start off with, we're going to look at your key and core interpersonal skills. Most importantly is our ability to listen. And listening is not something that comes natural to everyone. It is something that it's a skill. It takes time for us to develop, but it can be extremely challenging because in order for us to listen, we need to actually learn how to silence the monkey chatter, is what I call it, the mental running of thoughts and our own voice inside of our our mind in order to be fully psychologically present for another person. The most therapeutic thing that we can do is actually say less and listen more, and even allowing for silence, which is a critical part of our listening abilities. So just to remind everyone about what active listening actually looks like, it is sitting calmly within yourselves and being fully present in that moment and being emotionally open for another individual, and psychologically ready for whatever it is that they may bring to us. Listening is also paying attention to the nonverbal communication, and I refer to that as using our third eye or our third ear. We're listening for the message within the message. Sometimes some of what our clients are saying to us is a little convoluted and a little bit passive. And what we want to do is we want to explore what they may be saying, but within a context of saying less. So it's the message within the message. I'll give you an example. A client may say to me, I think I may have some problems with my drinking. I think I may drink too much. So what am I hearing? This person has concerns about being an alcoholic, drinking to the point of intoxication, concerns about health implications as a result of their alcohol consumption. So, and maybe they're attributing many of the problems in their life to the consumption of alcohol, but I'm listening for the message within the message. What is the client really trying to say without being direct? And that's listening with my third ear. And then as a client, if I'm using my third eye, so to speak, a client is sitting and they're fidgeting and they're obviously uncomfortable, but they're telling me they're fine. My third eye tells me that there is something that is not fine. So I am listening to the nonverbal communication. The client may be gritting their teeth, shifting position, flexing themselves back and forth, crossing, uncrossing their legs, obviously nervous, but insisting they're fine. So that's part of communication competence, is listening for the nonverbal and watching for the nonverbal and hearing the message within the message. So moving along, just looking at the importance of listening and what message we send people by being active listeners and being so ready and so receptive to whatever it is that a client may wish to discuss. And really, relationship is about building that rapport and that building that relationship. And when we want to build a relationship with a person, and what we need to communicate to them is that we are listening, and listening says we are working with a person. And we can create such a power dynamic if we are talking to and talking at versus talking with and listening with. And what we want to communicate to a client through the act of listening is that we care about them, that we accept them. And it's not to say that we're accepting their behaviors, because often we're working with clients that their behaviors are unacceptable even to the clients. But what we want to communicate is this unconditional positive regard for the clients where they're at. We want a client to feel like they have significance and that we respect them, that they feel heard, and that we understand. It's a way in which we connect with another person, and it's the first effort we can make at establishing a sense of trust with the clients and helping a person feel less alone and less isolated. It's amazing what happens when we're listening to a client and we give them what I call open air, and we want a client to hear themselves talk. And sometimes talking with you, or in the sessions that I have with my clients, it's the first time the clients are talking with a professional. And just through the act of sitting quietly and listening and being available and attentive, that our clients hear themselves talking for the first time. And it's amazing how many epiphanies or connections or conclusions they can draw from taking the time to hear themselves out and knowing that they have a sounding board. So again, it's about helping the clients make sense of their current situations, their past experiences, making connections from their past to their current, clarifying their own behavior, opening up an opportunity for them to ask for help for the first time. It's also an opportunity for them to give feedback to us when we are open and receptive to communication, that they can tell us what they like, what they don't like, what they need more of, what they can do with less of. It's also an opportunity for the clients to really discuss their core feelings about their treatment, about what's going on in their life, and to release, we call it a cathartic release, where a person can sit and just talk and hear themselves talk and make those connection points and just feel this sense of relief, like a weight has been lifted off of them. And that's the release of tensions. And this is all things that come from just being available and actively listening to a client. So we want to talk about effective listening. And again, it just kind of leads into what we were just talking about. It's providing an opportunity and the time for the person to tell their story. We want to give them that quiet, that private space that is free from distractions as best as possible. Sometimes our clients don't necessarily give us that opportunity. They may talk to us in an elevator, they may talk to us in a busy hallway, or suddenly we're at a bus stop and they've decided now is a good opportunity to disclose some pretty intense information. And when we're working with clients in their home, their families are there, and there's some distractions, like it might be other children or pets or a spouse or a partner. But we want to try and sit with the client quietly, and even just to sit, we can tune out all the extraneous information and stimuli in an environment when we're fully engaged in the communication with a client. But the idea is to just give them that sense of connection with another human being, to talk, to feel, to release, and to be quiet within themselves while they're talking. So again, effective listening, sometimes we're not always going to have the best situation, the best timing. It's not always going to be perfect, but it'll be needs-based. And when a client needs to talk, a client is going to create the opportunity to talk. The important part about listening, and we're going to talk about some of the listening skills we want to employ a little bit later on, but the important part about listening is when we feed that back to a client and we can share our level of understanding, and that client feels heard when we share, often in our own words, what we heard the client say, but also reflecting meaning and reflecting feelings. That is the essence of effective listening. We want to give full attention by focusing on what the person is saying and do our best to tune out the external distractions. But one of the greatest challenges, and for 5 years I taught communication skills to mental health and addiction students, we want to be able to tune out our own mental chatter, and I call it monkey chatter, because a client is talking to us about some of the most important things that are going on in their lives, and unfortunately we'll have this fleeting thought that comes into our mind and says, did I turn off the stove? Oh crap, I gotta do laundry tonight, and oh, I gotta remember to go to the grocery store after work today, and we have to tune all of that out, or what's coming up in our next appointment and what we forgot to do, and make a mental note of this or that. Effective listening says, I can fully sit, quiet, ready, prepared, open, receptive to what this person is saying, and it's a skill. It takes time to learn how to quiet everything outside of me and also everything inside of me to be fully cognizant and psychologically available and ready for a client. So as I mentioned, we're listening to the nonverbal communication as well, our third eye and our third ear. And the reason is because 80 to 90% of our communication is nonverbal. Body language that we're looking for includes eye contact. Our clients may be sitting quietly but staring at us, and staring could be because they're so actively involved or because they've tuned us out, and that has happened. I work with trauma survivors, so it can be that the client has dissociated, and I need to be mindful of that I may have lost that client into a flashback. Some of our clients, and this can be cultural, may avoid eye contact with us, or they may be really uncomfortable, and this is their way of communicating to us that we've hit a sensitive spot that they're not ready to discuss at this point in time. Looking at their facial expressions, frowning, smiling, clenching their teeth, biting their lips, raising eyebrows, like all of these things can communicate comfort or discomfort. And learning to read nonverbal communication is an area of communication competency in and of itself, and it takes time. And if you're confused, there's no harm in saying to someone, oh, I think I might have hit on something there. Is there something I need to explore? Did I miss something? Check in with the client. Am I making you uncomfortable? I'm not sure how to read that, and just let them know that you've noticed it. And then it's not trying to make them uncomfortable, but giving them an opportunity to speak to what that nonverbal communication could mean. And sometimes we're completely wrong. I've missed the boat 100,000 times. Okay, maybe not that much. You'll start doubting me as a psychotherapist if it was that much. But in truth, there have been times, and this is more of a reflective of cultural differences, that I've seen something, called out what I anticipated that may have meant, and the person said, oh no, my contact is bothering me. Okay, all right, but I would rather be open and honest and give the opportunity for a client to explore that with me than to pretend like it didn't happen and the client may feel dismissed. Paying attention to our voice, how fast we talk, and I'm originally from northwestern Ontario, and it's really cold up there on the best of days, so I always tell people I talk too fast because I'm from northwestern Ontario and it's so cold up there we don't have time to talk slow. But the truth is I'm a fast talker, and I have to be aware of that with the clients that I'm supporting, that when they are deeply depressed or in an anxious state, that talking too quickly can surpass their cognitive cognitive, there we go, capabilities at that point in time, and they may miss a lot of what I'm saying because they're just slightly behind where I'm at. But also paying attention to the tone I use. In some cultures, tones can imply different things. So we want to be mindful of, sarcastic tone in particular, because not every culture understands sarcasm. The volume, the accent, and the accentuation of certain words, the inflection. When we ask a question, as an example, our voice tends to go up. So, how are you doing today? So the inflection of our voice going up. And the pauses. And communication competency says that we can read pauses, that when a client pauses, that is an opportunity for us to maybe interject, or maybe the client is pausing because they need an opportunity to reflect and think. And it's not necessarily that we should jump in with a piece of a suggestion or advice, or, if we're feeling really confident, a piece of our infinite wisdom, or asking another question, but to understand what that pause really means. Also about reading our body movement, the client's movement, but checking in with ourselves is critical as well. So we understand what we're communicating when we cross our arms, when we sit with our hands clenched, or our brows are furrowed. Like, we can send a lot of messages through our nonverbal communication as well, but also watching for the clients, the posture. Are they sitting really tensely? Are their shoulders up? Are their hands gripped? Are their teeth clenched? How are they sitting? Are they sitting back in a relaxed posture? Like, I watch clients in their intake with me go from sitting literally on the edge of their seats to sitting back in a more relaxed position after they have a sense of who I am and how the session is going to proceed. And that's part of setting tone as well. We have a communication tone, but letting the clients know who I am from the very beginning so they know what to expect. We also want to pay attention if the client begins fidgeting, they're making certain gestures, and some gestures don't carry the same meaning from one culture to the next. So we just want to be very mindful of things like the thumbs up does not always mean good job or positive, or it can mean something very derogatory in other cultures. Checking in with yourself and asking the client to check in with themselves for physiological responses, such as you may notice a client is beginning to perspire. They may be wiping their hands or rubbing their feet on the ground or inside of their shoes because their hands or their feet are sweating. Sweating is a common byproduct of anxiety disorders. So their upper lip and their brow may be sweating. And that's a good point in which to check in with how you're proceeding with the communication and with your conversation. Is there something you're saying or doing that is escalating their anxiety? And maybe slowing things down or looking at the type of questions you're asking. Maybe you're being a little too intrusive right from the get-go, and maybe we need to talk about something non-threatening for a little bit so a person can relax a little bit. We also say a lot in how we dress. So I work with people who have some pretty significant anxiety disorders, and there is a little guy that I'm supporting right now who is 12. Now, the outfits that I would wear to support someone, like if I'm working with a professional, with doctors, lawyers, like my clientele run the gamut of professions, but I will tell you that I have specific attire that I wear on the days that I'm working with my little 12-year-old. because I want him to feel relaxed. So I may have ripped jeans on, and they're not horribly ripped jeans, but a sweatshirt, like a Roots hoodie or something, so that when we're sitting and talking and building Lego, one, I'm a little bit more comfortable because heels and Lego just seem to be a bit of a contradiction for me anyway, but that he feels I'm approachable and that I'm not structured or strict, and that I'm more friendly. But I also have to be mindful that if I wear this same attire into other sessions, that it could create the impression that I'm unprofessional or too relaxed or too casual or can't be taken seriously. So, you know, our appearance is a part of our communication. We also demonstrate our values in the clothes we wear, and I mean, I could say a lot if I was wearing a t-shirt that's had beer slogans all on the front, and working in addictions, that's not ever a wise idea. But I would communicate my values and potentially turn a client away from seeking therapy with me if I'm wearing inappropriate attire with inappropriate slogans across the front. Okay? So yes, just recognizing that even our attire is an opportunity to create communication with our clients. Now, I know in the audience we have individuals where touch is a form of communication, where touch is more common. Now, in my profession, touch is often a big no-no, because touch can communicate something that in as a field, in my field, I should say, can be boundary crossing. Like, I work with some very vulnerable individuals, and they may have exaggerated startle reflexes, and to reach out and touch a shoulder or touch a knee or something like that could communicate something that is less than professional. But in healthcare, touch is so essential. And we can say so much when we reach out and touch somebody's hand, or touch their shoulder, or hold their hand, or just a gentle light stroking of their forearm to provide reassurance. So I wasn't always a psychotherapist. I worked as a private nurse 100 million years ago, and I worked with seniors. And it meant so much for someone to hold their hand, and you could say so much just by holding someone's hand. So it is a form of nonverbal communication, and it communicates that I respect you, that I care for you. A handshake, I will always shake my clients' hands. I'm not a huggy kind of person, but if there's a client and a need presents and it makes sense and I can justify it, putting my arm around the shoulder of a client says I'm with you, I'm feeling with you, and it's in an empathetic form of touch, so I can justify that. But I have to be mindful of gender comforts, that it could be communicated as something flirtatious, that it could be offensive in someone's culture. We can't always predict how a person is going to respond to touch, so like all communications, it is culturally sensitive, it's about time, it's about the situation, and it is needs-based for you and for the client. I would advise you to always ask permission before you initiate any level of touch. Silence is a gift that is given. It is not something I am very good at, and I will fully admit it. There are times I am jumping to fill the silence, and there are times I'm very quiet, but silence, unfortunately, in our culture and in these days and times, and I shouldn't say in our culture, it just becomes a cultural norm in some cultures that silence is uncomfortable and we can't permit it because we don't know what silence means. So there are times where I have to remind myself the same thing I told myself, almost 20 years ago when I started working in addictions. And this is going to sound so blunt, but what I honestly had to tell myself was shut up and listen. Because I was so intent to fill the silence. I wasn't sure how to interpret silence, but silence is necessary. It's necessary for the client, it's necessary for us, and it's permission to take the time to pause, to think, to reflect. I will now say to my clients, I need to sit with that for a moment just to reflect on that, and I will ask them to take the time to reflect on that and whatever it was that they just said. And I feel a little more comfortable now after many years in the field saying to a client, I'm not sure what to say to that. I'd like to take that back and think about that a little bit more, and I may take that home or when I'm doing their notes, reflect on a little bit more, because I may not know what to say and I may not have a follow-up or a question I can ask, but I really want to take the pressure off you when I tell you that it's okay to have silence, and we need to resist the urge to fill that silence with something, a question, a comment, some point of feedback. Just let yourself sit quietly, and I find it's helpful to count to 5 and see if the client or the patient will fill the silence. And if they don't, then to say, okay, maybe now's a good time to sort of switch gears. But learning to sit with the silence, that takes time. And if you're uncomfortable, as I was for many years in the early parts of my career, with silence, practice it at home. And with your friends, when they're in a troubled situation, just sit quietly, count to 5, and see if they say something. We just want to be very aware that there are times it's really inappropriate for us to be quiet, and that's when a client is in a stage of crisis. If a client is in crisis, that's not a point to sit back with your arms crossed and just nodding. The client needs to hear from you, and it can be small encouragers like, I see, can you tell me more? Just something that tells the client you're still with them, but that you want the client to communicate as much as possible. All right. Reflecting, just looking at some of these skills that we can employ in communication. This is one of the more popular and well practiced but also necessary communication tools, is learning to talk with a client after they've had a good chunk of time and they were communicating with you, but to reflect back to the client the core of their message, but in our own words. It's a great opportunity to restate what the client has said to you, and it's very person-centered. We have to be careful that we're not inserting our interpretations or analysis of what the client says. It is honestly just what the client has said to us, and it's so helpful for a client to hear what they've said in someone else's words, and we give it back to them, and for the client to reflect for themselves what's been said, hear their own words rephrased, and think about where their situation is at, and ask them to explore a little bit more. But it also tells the clients that we are accepting of the the information that we've received this far and that we understand it. And if in our reflection the clients say, no, that's not quite it, then that's a point in which we can clarify, and the client can correct any misunderstandings. Paraphrasing. So paraphrasing involves expressing the person's core message again in our own words, but we don't change the meaning. The words are slightly different. I want to encourage you to avoid what I call parroting a client, which means that we are repeating word for word everything the client has said. It can come across as obnoxious and condescending. So we just want to work a little bit harder to make sure that when we're either reflecting or paraphrasing, that we're reflecting what the client has said and in our own words, but in a way that demonstrates we're listening, demonstrates that we've heard what the client has had to say, and leaves the client feeling supportive, but again allows us to go back and check for clarity and make sure that there's a strong understanding. Summarizing, what we tend to do at the end of a lengthy form of communication from the client, and we just want to summarize the information as we've heard it. It's like a longer paraphrase, but it's not like a list of facts. It's a useful intervention, especially if the person has provided a wealth of information, and we can summarize after the client has been talking for several minutes, or in the case of some of the clients I've sat with, they may have been talking for 20, 30, 45 minutes just because they're on such a roll and they need this information to come out. So I will summarize after a very lengthy conversation, but it is more so information from the client. And again, much like reflecting and paraphrasing, it's about an opportunity to correct any misunderstandings. The client can elaborate further, and it allows them to hear their main points for a second time. Probing skills. It's about making use of questions, and most appropriately, if we're really looking for information, we want to make sure that we make use of the open-ended questions, such as when and what and how, who or where. The idea being that it allows the client to go into a more expansive description, provide a lot of information, and invites the clients to do the bulk of the communication, which is what we're looking for ideally. There are some things I want to advise against, and these are, I've refer to them as unhelpful questions, and it's not that they're unhelpful. They're just like all communication competency. These questions have a time and a place, but some of them don't have any place. But we really need a strong relationship with a client in order to use some of these what I called unhelpful questions. So I'll clarify it as we go through. The first one that I brought up for you is closed questions. And there's a time and a place for closed questions. And closed questions can be very useful if we are crunched for time, we need facts or information. But if we are really looking to sit with the client and allow them to explore, we want to avoid closed-ended questions because it can shift the power dynamic to feeling like an interrogation, just Q&A, and the client doesn't necessarily feel heard or listened to, and it can be rather invalidating for a client. So closed-ended questions are questions that only allow for a yes, no, or maybe response. Useful when trying to gather very specific information, but they do not encourage discussion or dialogue. It can really limit how much we can engage with a client, which can hurt our ability to build rapport and relationship building. If we overuse the closed-ended questions, it just becomes a Q&A, and that's a hard habit to break, and our time with the client can feel dissatisfying, confrontational. It's closed-ended questions are just not for expansive and detailed communication. Leading questions, and the leading questions are questions that often start with, well, don't you think? And they're not really a question. They're more of an effort to disguise our opinion, but they put the client on the defense. So I've given an example in the slide that says, for example, I don't think that you're very happy with your husband, rather than, how do you feel about your husband? I used to have a hard time with explaining this to students because they would say to me, well, you know, Professor Phillips, don't you think? And I'd say, no, of course I do. However, ask me a question, don't tell me your opinion, because that's really what you're doing when you ask me a leading question. Multiple questions. Multiple questions are when we're trying to ask more than one question at a time. And for clients that are highly symptomatic and maybe withdrawing from substances, they're very distracted. And for clients that are struggling with depression, there's a delay in the ability to understand information, learn information, sort information. So if we're asking multiple questions, then we can, more likely we're going to confuse a client, or they get uncertain which order in which to answer those questions. So we want to make sure that we ask one question at a time. The either-or question. These questions are leading. Often they have our opinion or our biases contained right in the question, but we want to make sure that when it's like a multiple question, we ask more than one question, but we really don't provide the options that a client needs in order to feel like they have control. So we want to avoid either-or questions. So I put an example right in there for you on the slide that says, what do you want to do? Go for a walk or attend the anxiety management group? But I've asked them, what do you want to do? So, and then I provide them with two options that I want to do. If I really am interested in what they want to do, I will just stop the question at, what do you want to do? The why question. I love teaching about why questions. The why question says that we want to earn a very solid relationship with a client before we have the right to ask them why. Why can make clients very defensive, and our responses from the clients are, why not, because, or a very detailed and long and expansive exploration of intellectual prowess. So I ask you to be very cautious in asking why questions, because it can appear like an interrogation. We can make a client defensive, or they can simply say, if I say, well, why would you do that? The client can say, why not? Because. Or give me a very expansive and elaborate response. So I just want to take a couple minutes and then we can move to some Q&A for everyone, just to give you some general guidelines that I've learned over the years. And I used to work with some highly symptomatic and very mentally ill individuals, and they were always lovely individuals, and they were going for lunch with the Queen, or they were having dinner with the Prime Minister and such. But it really shifted how we communicated with individuals when they were unmedicated, unmedicated and schizophrenic, or in the manic phases of bipolar, etc. So I just want to share with you some general tips, and then we'll move to a little bit of Q&A. So most importantly, be respectful to the person. If they feel respected and heard, they're more likely to reciprocate, and if we have to offer guidance or suggestions or advice because they've asked for our advice, then they're more likely to consider it. If our clients are experiencing hallucinations, that is their reality, and no amount of arguing and pointing out the errors in their reality is going to bring them back to our reality. And we have to keep in mind that hallucinations are a neurological event, so to speak. And the brain is miswired and miscommunicating, and nothing you're going to say or do is going to convince them that what they are experiencing is not real. So we work with the hallucination. It's not to say that I'm going to pretend I am having the same hallucination. That is more offensive than anything. But explaining to a client that we understand that that's how they're feeling, that's what they're seeing, that's what they're experiencing. Not that we agree with their reality, but that we understand it, then that can be in and of itself very relieving for the clients. Some of the clients know that what they're hallucinating is not real, and it's very distressing for them. So we want to be compassionate and understanding that what they're seeing or hearing is not real. They know it, but they can't stop it. Some people with paranoia, whether it's substance-induced paranoia or a byproduct or a symptom of mental illness, it can be very frightening for them. So we never quite know how they're going to react, so just give them a little bit more physical space. Never assume that our clients with mental illness are lower in intelligence. I will tell you, some of the smartest people I've ever met who experienced some rather significant mental health disorders were also professors or had their PhD and highly intelligent. Some individuals have not even finished high school, but absolutely intelligent. So don't assume that anybody with a mental health issue or an addictions is unintelligent. Let's go to our next slide. Let's not be afraid to work with clients with mental health or addictions. We don't want to pass them on like a hot potato and pass the buck. Unfortunately, clients feel really disrespected by that, and sometimes we just need to develop a sense of comfort for ourselves. And clients with mental illness and addiction can challenge us, and it's not to say that we're going to be perfect, but at least give it your best shot. Give it an effort. Try to build that relationship with someone. And sometimes we're working with individuals and they disclose their mental illness to us after the fact, and then we realize that we have the capacity to support individuals with mental health challenges. The idea is to listen to the person, try to understand what they're communicating. Don't turn off or turn down your communication skills. See what we can do to help. We may not be able to help them in every respect, but at least see if we can help them in some respects. It's important to set limits with our clients. Sometimes our clients are much like I am, very long-winded, and we have to set some limits, like I only have 5 minutes to talk to you. Always make sure you have a list of community resources for the clients. So if they have unmet essential needs like food, shelter, clothing, that you can help guide them in the right direction. Lastly, if you are really feeling threatened by a client, remember safety is important for you and the client, and if you need to call security, or the client needs to be hospitalized because they're a threat to themselves or someone else, then it's sometimes best that you involve the police and that you look at having a client or a patient hospitalized to help them stabilize in their symptoms. All right, that's kind of it for me today. I'm going to open it up for questions from everybody, and it looks like we're going to be opening up from what I can see in the chat box. So feel free to ask some questions, guys.
Yeah, Megan, thank you very much. That was a great webinar with lots of very practical tips from body language, clothing, the way we present ourselves, what we read in clients. Wow, there was just a lot of good tips in there. So I'm sure there'll be some questions coming. I'm thinking that people might be typing, so let's give them a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's taking time, or maybe it was all very clear, and of course people will have access. Oh, here's questions coming.
Good.
So let's around this question. Do you have any suggestions for how staff within the Healthy Babies, Healthy Children program can work on these skills either individually or as a team? For example, role modeling activities, self-reflection exercises. Great question, Miranda.
Oh, it is a fantastic question. I would say, practice makes perfect, and it is learning the communication skills that we were talking about today just on a social level. I would say definitely practicing these in a team, but on non-threatening topics, just having a conversation and allowing turn taking. So a person talks for 5 minutes and you practice the skill of paraphrasing, summarizing, and reflecting. It takes time, it takes practice, but definitely work on these with family, friends, in role modeling. Absolutely. Great question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, doing like a little lunchtime role modeling session would probably be a great idea as a team. Because you can even use, what you know from a client, especially if you're doing it amongst the specific team, then one of them could be the client and the other the public health nurse or family home visitor. And we're getting some thank yous already. We got a couple of minutes. Anyone else got a question? Well, we had a great turnout. Lots of people there. I think we had like 63 plus some of them were there in groups. There are a couple of people who didn't let us know how many were in your group. I think it was Southwestern Health Unit, maybe Eastern Ontario Health Unit, if you can let us know. And also there were a couple of people signed in as guests, so it's always helpful to know who's there. But not that. Oh, here's one more question coming. And good. Okay. Oh, informative and enlightening. So yeah, it sounds like you, Megan, you really addressed everything. And if there's questions coming in after, you can always direct them to me and I will forward them to Megan. And you can find Megan's information on the internet. Oh, you've got it right here on the thank you slide. So you can actually ask directly. Is that okay, Megan?
Oh, of course it is. No, welcome to.
Great. Okay. So that's awesome. And yeah, everybody, thanks for coming. Have a safe and happy day. And hopefully a lot of this will be put into practice and as I say, lots of great practical tips here. And thank you so much, Megan, for your presentation. We really enjoyed that. Thank
Oh, my
you.
pleasure.
Okay, bye then, everyone.
The leader has disconnected.